Hi, everybody. Welcome to Inside Scoop with Sue. I am so excited to be back with Dr. Roni Cohen-Sandler. It's really always such a treat to get to talk to you. Thank you.
Same to
Um,
you.
so let me give you a little background on Dr. Roni Cohen-Sandler. She is a licensed clinical psychologist with decades of experience at assessing and treating adolescents and adults. She's the author of I'm Not Mad, I Just Hate You, which, by the way, I didn't know you, but when I read that book, I thought that is the best title. That just sums up my life at that moment. And then I think it's your most recent book, Anything But My Phone, Mom. Is that the
Yes.
most recent one? Yeah. Okay, so check those books out. And today we're going to talk about sending your kids off to college, which for me was trauma. It was really challenging. And the reason I'm doing this is because a friend said to me, I don't know how I'm going to get through this. And I was like, oh, well, why don't I get someone on to talk about this? Because you're not alone.
Not
So,
alone at all.
so my first question is, just for so many of us, sending that first kid to college has so many challenges. And I think it has three components that we're going to address. There's more, but what we're going to address today is how it impacts mom and dad, how it impacts the freshmen, and also one of the things we don't talk about a whole lot is how does it impact the siblings who are staying at home. So let's start with the after you drop your kid off and you say goodbye, you drive away or you fly away and you're like, how will I know if my kid is okay?
Well, that is a great question. But is it okay with you if we take a moment and step back for a second?
You take
Because
this, you do it. Yeah.
I just want to set the stage. This is a big deal for parents, especially because you may not even realize that you've been thinking about this moment for a very long time. People start thinking about college and they may focus on particular colleges, but really what they have in their mind is some kind of vision of what it's going to be like when their child goes to college. And a lot of thought and planning goes into the nitty gritty of applications and transcripts and all of that. But I think we can't neglect the fact that this is a pivotal moment for most people, whether they're conscious of it or not. And that means that there are a lot of emotions, some of which are acknowledged, some of which are not, they're not aware of. And so many things can happen that are very surprising. You may have an idea in your head about how you're going to feel at that moment, or how you're going to feel 5 minutes later, or when you're driving away from college. And guess what? All of that may turn out to be absolutely wrong. And so I just want to set the stage for what you're talking about here. So you say goodbye. Well, even saying goodbye, what did you think that was going to look like? I mean, did you think it was going to be like kindergarten, where, you who knows what you did at kindergarten? I did something absolutely crazy when my daughter, my oldest, went to kindergarten. I followed the bus and hid behind a tree to see if she walked out with a smile or whether she was crying. Of course, I didn't admit that for like 10 years, but I was a little bit better with college, but not much. So, we all have our things that we bring to that situation. But to answer your question, you say goodbye. And hopefully that goodbye is not a scene. Hopefully that goodbye has been started months before, years before. You've been saying goodbye and kind of anticipating the separation for a while so that in the moment, you're not hysterical crying, holding on for your child for dear life. They're falling apart. You want to avoid that kind of scene, right? Definitely.
Failed at that one.
Oh no. Well, the thing is that teens that I talk to always want to hold it together, right? And so they know that if their parents have one tear in their eye or they feel any trembling when they're saying goodbye, they're afraid that they're just absolutely going to lose it. And so I think it's kind to kids to kind of keep it together and also realize the fact that this is not goodbye forever. This is not goodbye to you being a parent. It's going to change, but you're not saying goodbye to your teen forever. It's not like you're not going to be a mom anymore or dad.
Okay, well, we'll write me off on doing that well. I did not. But I did acknowledge to my kids that it was not for them to worry about, that I was being insane and that they should run off and skip off into the sunset.
Well,
Um,
that's
But I guess one of the things is that we've had our benchmarks. We've had our, like, how do we know if our kid's okay when they're living at home? And then we say goodbye to them to this whole new world, and we don't know if they're okay. So how do we cope with that? And also we hear so much about anxiety and depression in college age kids. How do we know, should we worry if we're not hearing about them? Should we worry if we are hearing from them and they're sad?
You just put it exactly right, Sue, because I think that if you're prone to worry, you're going to worry no matter what. And the truth is, you don't know what to worry about, right? If you don't hear from them, it could be a great sign that they're so busy, they're so immersed in college life. And you could think, wow, that's really fantastic. They must be busy and happy and involved. And if you do hear from them, what you might hear, and this, I want to say this many times so that parents will remember this. If you talk to your child and your child sounds weepy, homesick, feeling lost, you might think, oh, that my kid is not adjusting to college life well. Well, that is perfectly normal. Okay. That occurs many, many times. And I think it happens for many, many students throughout the freshman year. So that's one thing to keep in mind. The second thing is, if they're kind of what I call dumping on you, it doesn't mean that they're going to feel that way 5 minutes after they hang up the phone with you. Okay. They may be just dumping that on you, and for you to say, I hear what you're saying. I understand that you're homesick or whatever. That's perfectly normal. What have you got planned for the rest of the day? And they'll tell you or whatever. Or the best thing that happens is they call you and they're walking across campus. And this is the beauty and the bane of technology now. They're walking across the campus and they're talking to you and they're saying, I don't know. I don't know if I like my dorm. I don't know if this is the right school for me. And your anxiety is going up and up and up. And in the middle of this 5-minute conversation, they suddenly say, oh, Mom, I've got to go. I'm seeing a friend. Bye-bye. And they hang up. And then they're like, hi, you hear them as they're. And so you get kind of the both sides of that. So what I would say to you is that it's normal for you to worry because you're not talking to your child that much. That doesn't mean there's anything to worry about. You know your child very well, and you know how they've handled separations in the past. So you have anticipated with them probably that, they might, if they tend to be the kind of kid who went away to sleepaway camp and was nervous for the 2 weeks before, but then had the best time in their lives, that's what you're going to remember. Or if they tend to be the kind of kid that needs support, then you've probably arranged for them to have some kind of support. If they've been anxious and depressed in high school, for example, I want to say that it's not that that college students are more anxious and depressed than high school students. In fact, young people these days are more anxious and depressed. So many of the kids who are going to college these days have been in treatment, and like 25% of them are on medication. So if you have one of those kids who's vulnerable, you've made plans for them to be monitored and supported when they're in college.
I think the best thing I've heard in so long, and actually I don't know if I've heard it before, is like this idea, not that we know our kids. People say that, of course, you know your kid, but reflect on it. Like I was no different as a mom saying goodbye to kindergarten like you. I didn't chase the bus, but I did weep when they went to college. But I could look back and know how each of my kids responded to that. So
Yes.
I don't think I thought about that. Like, what a good thing to take a moment right now and reflect on that particular kid and how they dealt with separation.
Right. We tend to do those kinds of things habitually. We have the same challenges every time we have a similar situation to that.
Yeah, really helpful. Okay, so let's move away from how the kid is doing to how are the parents doing. And mostly we've got moms on the call. So let's say how, if we aren't doing well, we're just not doing well. It's a big transition for us, and loss and grief in this whole story. So what do we do?
Well, first thing that we do is practice some self-compassion, because we have a sense of we're failing our kids or there's something wrong with us if we're having this tremendous grief reaction. Honestly, I had never been depressed in my life until my oldest child went to college. And so it was this brand new experience for me. I felt like someone had removed my organs without anesthesia. And so, I mean, it was terrible. It lasted for 6 months. So what I did was I wrote a journal about it. I just kept, writing my feelings in my journal because it was so life-changing for me. But it's important not to berate yourself or to try to talk yourself out of it. I think that, all the literature on feelings and modulating feelings, working with feelings, is that you acknowledge what they are, and then you don't hold on to them and think that there's something wrong with you. And the other thing is that, it's important to make sure that you're taking very good care of yourself during this time. If you're feeling vulnerable, it's not the time to make huge decisions or decide that you're going to get an apartment in your kid's college town, which actually happened to a few people that I know. I would not recommend that. I would remind yourself that this is temporary. It's a process of grieving, as you just said very aptly. You're grieving not only from seeing your child every day, but you're grieving a part of your identity, because your role as a mother really does change. I mean, it doesn't go away, but it changes. And that is very, very hard, especially if you have really identified as a mother, or if you haven't had a lot of outside interest. So many mothers today are so busy with their kids. They have 3 or 4 kids, and they're constantly running around and taking care of their kids. And when 1 or 2 go to college, they feel this sort of hole in their lives or hole in their identity. And so I think it's important to go through that process and to really reflect on yourself and do self-care and talk to somebody. I mean, that's also helpful.
So it's interesting. You said go through the process. I think that most of us want to figure out how to stop it.
Right.
And so is it a requirement? Like, is our path to wellness going through it and not trying to not experience it?
Well, that's an excellent question. And what I should say is that everybody experiences this differently. And so, you can have moms who are perfectly fine. They're saying, no, they're not feeling anything at all. It's just another day. Things change, and you never know really what's going on. That's why I always say it's important not to compare yourself to other people, because for that particular mom, they may not be in a place where they can or want to confront those vulnerable feelings, right? I mean, they may not have any, but they also may have them. And for whatever reason, they're not able to face them. And then we have these wonderful coping strategies, right? These defenses. One of them is called denial. And denial it has a bad name, but I think it's one of the most fantastic defense mechanisms, because if it helps you from not sort of experiencing this horrible despair, like people have removed your inner organs without anesthesia, and it works for you, great, it works for you. But for other mothers who are really feeling it, I don't think you can talk yourself out of it. I think you have to look at yourself. And I'm not saying you have to go through 5-day-a-week analysis for 10 years. I'm saying that you at least should pay attention to, why am I feeling so bad? What is it that feels yucky to me? And maybe just by looking at that, you realize that maybe some of the things you're focused on are really not that bad, or that things haven't changed all that much. For example, I think one of the reasons that I was so upset when my daughter left for college is that she basically didn't really talk during her adolescence. I would say from 14 to 18, she didn't talk. And we weren't particularly close. And so I was devastated because I thought I had lost my chance to be close to my daughter. I mean, I really thought this.
Mm-hmm.
And what happened pretty quickly is that she started calling me when it was in her control. She started calling me, and I found that we were talking more when she was a freshman than we did for her all years of high school put together. And so things like that can evolve. And so I think it is important to pay attention to what's going on and not to try to suppress it That doesn't usually work because it crops up in other ways that's kind of unhealthy.
It's so interesting though, because your fear and your loss was entirely different than my fear and my loss, right?
Oh,
But that moment is the moment that kind of opens up this gap to feel it, where you maybe could kind of patch it all along the way. So
yes.
that those moments of transition and saying goodbye are such big ones. Not everybody's feeling it the same way. So if you're someone who's grieving and you're hanging out with people who don't understand it, is that better for you in terms of learning how to cope? Or like, should you look for the moms who are weepy also?
Well, that's a great question. And I think it's also very much an individual thing because if you're a person for whom, the saying misery loves company works for you, if you feel that it normalizes your feelings to be around other mothers who are weepy and that helps you, I'm not going to say don't do it, right? For me, I have a different tactic. I've always had friends who were older than me, just by happenstance, and they've gone through this process or other processes, before me. And so I seek out people like that and say, what was it like for you? And to share my experience. And I get a lot of reassurance that whatever I'm going through is something that other people have gone through, and also that it ends. Also that it doesn't go on forever. And what I'm feeling now, although it may hurt a lot, will not always be this way. And what I want to say also is that this is a tremendous loss and it's a sudden loss. And I have found in working with people over, 4 decades, is that when people have experienced sudden losses before, particularly the loss of a loved one, unexpectedly, particularly the loss of a parent when they were very, very young, sometimes those initial losses sort of make later losses much more intense and bring up old feelings that they thought had been buried. And so it's really an individual thing, and you might be just as upset as the next person, but for entirely different reasons. So I'm not sure that that's always helpful.
Well, it's interesting because the journal can really help you kind of maybe delve into where the emotion's coming from.
Exactly. That's what it did for me. The first and last time I've journaled in my life, by the way, but it was very, very helpful for those 6 months.
Christina says, thank you for sharing, Ronnie, which is always nice
My
to hear.
pleasure. Yes, very nice.
Okay, let's move into the sibling part of this.
Yeah.
So, some siblings, they really are best friends. Not in my house, but in other houses you hear about it.
Right.
And that as adults, they're much closer, but in those high school years, not in my house. So that loss is painful for them as well. How do you get home from college and make the new home joyful with minus one best friend?
Well, that's a tall order, I think. I don't know that you can do that. I mean, I think it helps if the child that's home doesn't see you, in your bed crying all day because of the child who's gone. They tend to feel a little neglected if that happens. But providing that you are going about your business and focusing on the next child, and nothing has changed in a kind of really jarring way, then you can focus your attention on what it's like for that child. Because it's not just the loss of the sibling and what the sibling represents in terms of maybe a confidant, which is very often the case, but also the sibling order has now changed. The child who was next in line is now the oldest in the house. And that shift is profound. And so I think it's important to be curious about what that child is missing. Are they missing their sibling? And if that's the case, obviously you can encourage them to be connected. And again, that's where technology is really helpful. And you can talk about what it feels like. I think it's important to acknowledge, gee, the dinner table is going to feel different now, without your big sister or brother. You're paving the way for other children to kind of acknowledge that without them fearing that they shouldn't mention it, because it's a taboo subject. I have to share one thing. It's so interesting. You may not realize what your younger kids are thinking about this. You may have assumptions and they may be totally wrong. So our older child, as I said, didn't talk, and the younger one was a chatterbox. And so he kind of held court at the dinner table. But when my daughter went to college, he said to my husband and me, "Can we start watching the news during dinner?" And we were so taken aback. We were like, "We don't watch the news. What are you talking about? Like, we've never done that ever. Why would you want us to do that?" And he said, "Well, I just don't want to be the one that you're asking all the questions to." And we were so shocked because, first of all, he didn't need questions. I mean, he was just a chatterbox, but you never know what kids are thinking. So I think it's great to ask kids, after a few days, what's it like not to have your sibling here? Do you feel different? Do you feel like we're treating you differently? Or do you feel like you're on the hot seat? Or, you can kind of make light of it in a way. It doesn't have to be this deep, serious conversation. But you'll get a lot more out of it when you talk about it, and you can kind of take the pulse of your child and how they're dealing with it. A lot of them, I mean, the ones who are really close, and I find that I shouldn't make this generalization, but I do find often that sisters are very, very close. And when one leaves, the other one is very, very bereft. And so I think it is important to be alert to that. So I'm glad you're asking this question, because you're right. People don't think about it as much.
Well, the woman who asked the question has 2 sons and they're best friends. So
Okay.
the story works on both sides. In my
Yes.
family, it opened up an opportunity for the next kid in a house of many kids. So in my house, that sibling thing was an opportunity that the next younger kind
Right.
of blossomed in a way that they didn't in the shadow of the one above them.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
yeah, that was one good thing in my house about change. Is there a time like when my kids went to college, they said don't evaluate college till after Thanksgiving. I know it's been a while, and also we've had COVID. Is there some kind of adjustment period that you would say if it goes longer than this, you would start to worry?
I wouldn't, because even before COVID, I really found that so many students didn't feel settled into college until really the end of their freshman year or even their sophomore year. I wish I could tell you, how many college freshmen have told me that that whole first year they were thinking maybe they went to the wrong school, maybe they wanted to transfer, myself included, actually. And we have this sort of romantic notion that when kids get to college, they're going to meet their roommate, and that roommate is going to be their, bridesmaid or best man at their wedding, and all this stuff. And that often does not happen. I mean, it happens sometimes, but it often does not happen. And I think it takes at least a year, sometimes more than that, for students to figure out who their tribe is. And we can't, put a deadline on that. And I really believe that that is one of the major factors in whether students feel at home at college, whether they feel safe there, whether they feel like they're in the place that they need to be, that there's a good match. It's often not the academics. I mean, that plays a role, but that's often not the biggest factor. It's whether they find students who they feel like they can be really closely connected with, whether they find people that they can identify with. And sometimes that takes a while. They don't make their best friends until sophomore, junior, even senior year. Not that they're unhappy that whole time, but I'm just saying that this is a process that I think takes longer and longer these days. So I don't agree with that after Thanksgiving kind of thing. As a matter of fact, sometimes Thanksgiving is the worst time to to see kids.
So how do we cope with that as parents? I mean, the thing that always comes through is when is it worrisome? When is it like, okay, honey, it's time to say, like, maybe you should look at another school, or maybe you need a break and you want to take a semester off? And when is it healthy for us to say to our kids, persevere, get resilience here?
Yes. Well, those are really phenomenal questions. And I wish I had really clear answers to that. And I think it's probably one of the hardest things to do as a parent, to kind of weigh all those factors. Again, this is not the first time you've gone through something like that with your child. whether it was in sports or academics or whatever, you've always been faced with that dilemma of, do I give them a little nudge out of their comfort zone so that they can build resiliency, or am I pushing them in a way that's unhealthy for them? And so I think what's important is to have discussions with them and ask them what they like about school, what they don't like about school, what they wish were different. And during those discussions, you can have a sort of problem solving session, essentially, because the truth is that no school is perfect, right? I mean, there's just no school that's perfect for them. And they will always like some things and dislike other things. But there are certain times when I think that I would pay more attention as a parent. And that's when a student is telling you that they feel like they can't be themselves in this place because the culture of the school is very different from their own personal beliefs and temperament and personality. That I would pay more attention to. And sometimes that's, unexpected. But the other thing is that there are resources on campus. All campuses have resources. And I would always encourage kids to take advantage of those resources, because you don't want to be the sole arbiter of, whether this is something that can be fixed or something that will improve over time with your encouragement and your support. And so getting administrators or counselors involved or advisors involved in this is a really good idea. You're not there and you don't have a norm of thousands of students. You just have your child who, you want to protect no matter what. So you don't have to be alone in this. I think it's important to bring in other people. And if your child is in therapy or having support from a mental health professional, they can be invaluable as well. As far as taking time off, generally speaking, that in my experience is clearer. That usually happens when students really don't feel like they can do the work, where they feel like whatever they're going through is so onerous that they really can't pay attention. And rather than your child failing a course or falling behind or getting asked to leave or put on probation, then yes, look into a medical leave of absence and make sure that they get the support and the time out that they need. And then they can decide whether they want to go back or whether they want to do their education in a different way.
Okay, Dr. Roni Cohen-Sandler, this has been so helpful as always, and your voice is always so soothing. So thank you for joining us, and I hope to everyone who's dealing with this right now that this was really helpful.
Thank you, Sue.